Hello, everyone. Welcome to our Arts Educator Roundtable for Arts in Our Schools Month. It's a little bit less full as we were planning, but that's not a problem because we have great people with us. And speaking of that, I'm going to pass it over to you guys to introduce yourselves. So, who wants to start?
I'll start. Hi, everyone. I'm Wendy Lisco, and I am an arts education consultant, actually. Have spent 20 years in the theater as a producer and in the arts education department, a director, dramaturg. Then I actually moved on to spend 17 years in philanthropy, and I had the opportunity to work at the Geraldine R. Dodge Foundation, and ultimately, before I left, was working on arts education, and have since then have been consulting for the past year, and really enjoying the life and I work a lot with schools. I am a consultant for healing-centered engagement with schools in Trenton as part of the Foundation for Educational Administration's work. And with the colleagues in Hojra, we have produced the Culturally Responsive Arts Education, Culturally Responsive Workout and Guiding Conversations that just came to a close a couple weeks ago.
When I host tables, I've heard people, like, when I talk to, there's a lot of different reactions, but when I talk to teachers and they know of us, they're like, they have free programs, they have free workshops, and it's so funny, and it's great because we do, and they're awesome because they're spearheaded by lovely people like you who are very educated in the field.
Thank you.
So I'm going to pass it to Brooke next, and then we'll go to Christina.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for having me tonight. My name is Dr. Brooke Myatt. I am an assistant professor and department chair at Rowan College of Burlington County. That's located in Mount Laurel, New Jersey. My specialty in the field is entertainment technologies, video, and digital media. I spearhead all of the television production courses, all of the film editing courses, documentary production, and we also have a sound and recording arm that does live sound reinforcement and advanced sound recording and engineering. And I'll pass it over to Christina, who I just met, and she's lovely.
Wait, before we do that, we have somebody added. Hi, Lisa. We're introducing ourselves.
Hello.
So I'm going to pass it to Christina, then we'll come to you.
Okay.
All right. Hi, I'm Christina Hill. I am the Director of Arts Integration and STEAM Education at Apple Farm Arts and Music Center, which is in Elmer, New Jersey. We have a 60-plus year running arts, visual and performing arts residential camp, and also do year-round programming. We host our Teen Arts Awards, Scholastic Poetry Out Loud competitions, and do a lot of community programming as well. And personally, I am mostly a visual artist. I was a teaching artist for many years when I was in New York City and taught some theater and movement to our littler kids. I ran a arts integrated and radio inspired preschool after that, and then was an art teacher, and now here I am at Apple Farm for the last 5 years.
That's awesome. I knew all that because I've worked with you a lot, but it's awesome to hear every time. Okay, Lisa.
So hello, I'm Lisa Conklin. I'm the past immediate president of Arts Educators of New Jersey, and we just had a spring symposium at Rowan. So we know Dr. Graziano over there. She's the past president. So I teach over in Somerset County. I'm a high school art teacher. I teach at Somerville High School, and I teach more of the digital side of art. Not that I've taught all the art classes there, but now I'm the one digital teacher because the other two art teachers are not. They don't want anything to do with the digital side. So I'm there, and I've been there for almost 16 years now.
There we go. We have a good range of people. That's awesome. So I'm going to start with an icebreaker, and it's the same icebreaker we did last year because it just was such a great hit. So this is brought to you by my boss, Priscilla Hopkins Smith, which I'm sure everyone who's streaming has met her through the times. So it's, if you had a magic wand that could fix something in your workplace, and it can be yourself, or it can be something about your workplace, or it can be something about your job or anything like that, what would you fix? And you get one wish. That's a hard one, so we'll give a little bit of time for that. Anyone who knows what they have in mind can go ahead.
I do. I feel like it's a motivation of students. I wish the students were a bit more motivated, and I think that the past 2 years has brought them down a bit, and just not in the moment. They are very much so, even more, if this can be possible, even more so into their phones. So it's hard to do. It's hard to keep them. I almost want to say entertained, but I wish that they were more motivated.
I have to agree with Lisa. It was so funny. Right before she spoke, I was like, is it just soft skills in general, should I say, for my students, or time management, or, I think, and when you said, is there something that you could change? I'm like, wow, I teach editing. And one of the things I teach with film editing is, don't we all want to edit a part of our lives? And what part would that be? And that was almost like a very similar question there with, what do you want to do in your workplace? But I do agree. I think right now it's challenging for my students to the motivation, definitely, but it's also, teaching them the soft skills. So not just the being creative, right? We're assisting that as educators, but it's everything else. It's the deadlines, the time management, how to communicate with their instructors, with people they're working with their peers, and that's just been challenging. Over the past, 2 years to kind of get back to that. So I've tried implementing a little bit more soft skills within my program to help that along.
I was one of Brooke's students last semester, and I do have to say, you having very strong deadlines made a big difference and made it feel very serious. Because when it's like, oh, you can turn it in a little bit later, it's harder to keep on the ball. And so having those deadlines, and even I had a deadline that I didn't make, and that was a consequence, and it was okay, and I didn't miss any other deadlines after that.
Everybody sign up for my class now.
Well, I think I would wave my wand, and I would ensure that teachers had the appreciation that they deserve in our nation. I I would do that in a heartbeat. I feel like they are doing an incredible job, especially over the past 2 years, but all along. And, there was that moment at the beginning of the pandemic when I felt, parents suddenly understood the task of what was actually involved in education. And I thought that there might be this shift, and I'm not 100% sure it's stuck. And I would love to see that happen. I'd like people to understand the frontline work that they do. I would like them to understand um, the cultivation practices that they do for all those soft skills, or I would say power skills that teachers teach, as well as the academics. And I would, and while we're at it, we should pay them even better. So there you go. That's my wand. Double whammy.
I think my response was in line with yours, Wendy, which, I think that I couldn't formulate my actual thought. I was like, maybe I just want like a cloud, or like a sensory pillow, or like something to just like scoop up all of our teachers and like really comfort them. I feel the hardest part of my role this year, for the past 2 years, has been supporting our teachers, because the pressure and the stress and the amount of time that they put into everything that they do. And, I know, I would agree that it does appear that students are harder to motivate, but I think that, overall there is an engagement struggle with students. And I think that often I feel like supervisors just expect teachers to figure it out and don't actually model and support them in the way that they expect teachers to model and support students. And I think a lot of the skills that are mentioned come from modeling, but it's impossible to model empathy and social emotional skills and all the things we expect out of it, trauma informed practices, all the things we expect and put on our teachers, without, as supervisors or as a school community or as parents, also affording that to them too. So I don't know how that translated to a pillow cloud, but that might just be what I need right now. And maybe I was thinking about that, but some kind of extra support for our teachers as well.
Absolutely. I agree with all those things. And I think jumping off of that, I kind of want to talk about, we didn't really focus on this very much last roundtable, and I don't think we focus on it enough when we're chatting as educators. What are some things that when you were learning your skills um, as to become an educator and to become an artist, though you were from the beginning, but who are some teachers that you remember doing things which sparked your joy, and what are some things that you remember during your education that helped you get to where you are now?
I think that for me, like, I remember teachers where things were low stakes game, where it was like a lot of play and silliness and, just fun, like genuine fun. And I always, whenever I'm working with teachers, I always ask them to like remember like something you did in school or whatever grade they're teaching, like what's something you did in the 6th grade. And usually what they remember is something silly they did or something fun or a project they did. And like, I think that those are the things that stick. Just in I had a music teacher, Mr. Frash, in Passaic Valley High School in Little Falls, New Jersey, who always had crazy puns about like our music, or would like sing these like puns about songs. And I just remember that with such fondness. And I loved music. Music was my respite. I took 0 period choir and lunchtime choir because I just wanted to be in that room because I felt so good. And I think that, the teachers who just really let me exist and didn't put extra expectations that were outside of, my natural like human abilities, and just let me explore something that I loved. Those are the moments and the times that I really remember.
And I mentioned that when I'm talking at the tables about how we should have every discipline in every school, because it gives the kids opportunities. And I know that's like a huge goal, and to have it some sort of representation in every school. So it gives the kids the opportunity to try out different things. And I can already see that there's things bubbling with Brooke, because I see it, because I feel like a community college is part of that, is part of the exploration. And then your program is so good at exploring all different parts of communication. So go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, I think I think community is one of those things. And I love that you brought up community college. I love teaching kind of basically where I live. I live 1 mile from campus. So, if I'm out at the local Wegmans, or I'm driving through Starbucks, or wherever I go, my students are everywhere. They're working and they're living in where I am. And it's just great to see them out. But I think one of the things that I can remember, so I did not start out in higher education. I literally went to school for film and video production. Out of school, I was working the 14, 16, 20-hour days with whatever freelance job I could get, being a videographer, working in a SAT truck, doing sports communications, working on golf shows, you name it, I've done it in production. And my teacher came to me and she said, you were really great. This was in college. Undergrad. And right after I graduated, she said, you were really great in these classes and you were really savvy with tech. She's like, I'm not so savvy with tech. Would you mind teaching me a few things? And I thought that was like, wow, she reached out, like this is a professor that I had, and she's reaching out and she's like, I'll hire you for the summer. We'll hire you and, we can work together. And I thought that was really great that I had the opportunity of sharing what I learned. and then reteaching it to her. And I think, giving your students opportunities, in the real world, shadowing, sharing, like networking and things, especially in a field like what I teach, it's all kind of networking, word of mouth, a lot of internships, trying to get your feet wet to land a job. I think just being able to teach and have someone learn under you and share that and applaud those students and take them under your wing. And I mean, I'll never forget those, moments. I was just, my early 20s, and I'm here like, I'm teaching as an adjunct to a class, and I'm getting paid to teach a professor of mine. It was like so cool. And that kind of inspired me to just keep on teaching, because she had commented, "You're such a great teacher. Like, did you ever think of teaching?" And no, I had never thought of it before. And now look at me now. So it's kind of an interesting way of how I got to where I am, being inspired by her.
That's really cool to hear. Lisa, go ahead.
So my direction is a little bit opposite of this. So I came from a very small Western Massachusetts high school. There's only like 175 students in the graduating class, and so I did not have the strongest art teacher, and she was not as terribly dedicated. She was a very nice person, but she wasn't as dedicated, and my portfolio was not strong by any means. So I felt a little bit behind the eight ball when I had applied to college, and so I felt like, I don't know if it was the size. Looking back now, I just felt like maybe more could have been done. And I know that she had a student teacher was in our class for quite some time, and it was a little bit helpful, but it didn't bring me to where, because I was like, not that I was devastated, but when I went for my bachelor's, I was like, wow, I got to kick it up a notch, because school did not prepare me for this. So I did that, and then my undergrad, I had a BFA, and then I went and I worked full time as a designer. I had not that I didn't take any educational classes. I married an educator, which is how I got into education. So I went and I got my master's, worked full time during the day, got my master's at night. Again, no education classes. I went for graphic design or communications design, and then when I graduated, I met my husband, and or in the midst of getting my master's, I met my husband, and he's an educator. So after working at a job and working in advertising and working as a junior designer and then senior designer and then art director, he's like, I kept saying, well, what is teaching like? And he's like, you should give it a shot. So that's why I did. There was a school called Catherine Gibbs in New Jersey. It's no longer around, but I taught at Catherine Gibbs at night, and that gave me my start. And that was right before 9/11 happened, and because it was in Montclair. And I remember the students, when 9/11 happened, they were showing me pictures and stuff, and I'm like, oh my gosh. So then I developed only adjunct, went to full-time position went to director of the program and teaching, and then that's how it, and then I Catherine Gibbs eventually closed. They closed their doors. So I went alternative route to get my teaching certification so I could teach high school, because that was the easiest transition for me. And then that's what I did. So I felt like in the back of my mind, I felt like I wanted to bring to students what my art teacher didn't do for me, if that makes any sense. So, not that I felt like she was a very nice woman, but I felt like it was a disservice for me. I felt like I was behind. I was all like, oh my gosh, I didn't prepare for this. And, I still enjoyed art, so I know I had a passion for it. But I just felt like I want to enlighten students, even though she was fun of an art teacher, but I don't have the skills then. She didn't, boast my skills. So I just told students, being a teacher, I want to make sure that students get recognized for their work. Because I don't think I was ever in an art show back then. I mean, I don't even know if she applied to be in art shows. I don't ever recall it. So I just remember in my mind thinking, I want to be something a little bit more richer for students.
Absolutely, and providing those opportunities are something that I know everyone on this call is really good at. I've seen it on every single facet. And so I smiled at a very inappropriate time. I don't know if you guys saw, but it was because Dennis commented, and everyone knows Dennis if they've been even near this channel, and there's going to be a stream with him tomorrow, finishing up our festival fun facts stream. Very fun. But he said all these rock stars, and so it made me smile because you really are, every single one of you kind of found your way to where you are in a different way than you expected when you were younger, and it's really beautiful that you found your way into this equilibrium of sharing your knowledge and sharing your skills. So it's really great. Wendy, you have something to say?
Well, I was going to answer your question. And maybe it's along the lines of Christina. And I love thinking about this question. I love thinking about the teachers that influenced me, and I believe I was always a creative. I was always making things. I must have started 5 or 10 businesses when I was a little kid, making, art from magazines and then starting a business with them. But I think it was, and I liked, I won an award for a library contest, and, that just, my famous poster about it was an owl, and I played around with who, and I won first place. And so that sort of winning was something that inspired me. But really what I think really set me is what Christina did too. I had a theater couple who taught me, and they let me try everything. I was sewing costumes. I got to act. I got to write. I got to dance. I got to sing, even when I couldn't. And keep giving me more to do every year, to the point where I did not go to school originally for theater. I went to school, and I also loved biology, and I went to school for wildlife management, and was going to be Jane Goodall, and then I just decided I'm going to take one theater class just because I need some joy and get away from chemistry for a little bit. And I just stayed there, and got my teaching certificate and etc. But it's I feel like that's the place where you can it's a place where everybody's welcome. And I saw a lot of, I had a lot of friends, we were all healing from something in high school. It's not an easy time. And we were a gang of people finding themselves. And so I think that inspires me to this day. I keep, I have friends from a long time ago who laugh at me because if I played this silent clown as in my senior year, which cracked me up because I can't tell you too much information here, but all these guys fell in love with me in my senior year. And I'm like, really? I'm a silent clown? I don't get to speak? That's what you're attracted to. Anybody who asked me out at that time period, forget about them. It was just, it just gave me so much, the theater. And, so I spent my life sort of trying to give back to it.
Absolutely. And I think going from that, what are some things that you as educators have thought? I should just stop using the term as educators. You're all educators here, we know. But but as educators, what are some things that you've noticed are pillars of a functional classroom, and then of a functional arts classroom? What are some things that you think are vital to the functioning of it? And then before we answer the question, I'll give you guys some time. Julia just commented, which I think people have also seen Julia throughout. She's my coworker. She just said, Wendy, this is the most fantastic story. So I'll pass on the question to anyone who's willing to answer.
Well, I think being organized. I mean, I'm just going to take basic stuff here, but for basic organization of it, for a classroom of whether you color code things or whether being organized or labeling, however you want to do it, I think that's a major. I mean, I think it just doesn't give enough credit that you have to be organized, and I think that you have to have some sort of process and some sort of groove about, because I think that students get more comforted when there's a process, when they know how you run a class, because they, you know, like by in September they're like, I don't know who Mrs. Conklin, and I don't know what's going to happen. But then I think by the time that they know the process, I think when you reach a comfort level, that's when they can grow more. And I think that if everything's unpredictable for them, and especially in, again, you know, we started out off with masks, and I think that was made them a bit uneasy and a bit aggressive, to be honest with you, a little bit like, you know, like, you know, I'm wearing the mask, it's hard to talk, they don't want to wear it, the whole thing, or some of them didn't. And so I think that having some sort of process had some sort of comfort level, and they're like, okay, we're going to start out with a question of the day and answer, and we're going to talk about it a little bit, and I try to create a comfort level in my room. I know there's a, you know, there's a fine line not to be too comfortable because I'm not their friends, but I'm just saying you want to make a comfort level so they're like, okay, Mrs. Conklin, so that they can talk. We have an open conversation at least. And I think organization, because I think pacing of the class and everything, that all comes with more and more time. In the beginning, you're fast and you're running through everything, and you're like, slow down, slow down. So I think that just comes with more practice. But I think the organization you can never get enough of, and I think the process of it, and of course to know your own content, but that of course you would already have in place, that you know your own content because you're teaching, you're certified.
I think that's something interesting that it reminded me of is you make an environment in your teaching space. If you're a teaching educator, you have to go to different schools or however you teach, and you have to make an environment in your presence. And as as an educator who has a consistent room, you have to make an environment in there so the students feel welcomed and it feels comfortable to be at. That's something that I like to focus on when I host streams is getting everyone to kind of know each other so that we feel comfortable sharing these parts about ourselves, because no one's going to feel willing to share anything about themselves if they don't feel comfortable and they feel guarded. And Wendy mentioned earlier about appreciating more about teachers. I think everyone kind of mentioned that, but appreciating more about teachers and the skills that they teach, and things that you forget about when needing to be a teacher. And that's something is that, you know, they're parents in a way, and they're making an environment for the students to learn. So yes.
For me, I think what's important to me in my classroom is take it a different direction than Lisa just did, but just like the connection and really forming a true community of learners. And, you know, I think modeling just normalcy, and by normalcy, I mean like your quirky, weird self, maybe like just really being who you are with your kids, because they are not stupid and they can see right through you. And, you know, it took me a long time to get to this place. I worked alongside some amazing teachers and also some teachers who I learned things I did not want to do from. And I really have become someone who values ceding control of the classroom to students, and, you know, letting them get their hands dirty and really make connections with one another. I think that, you know, we have this saying here that we say all the time, which is get on their train. Like before you try to get them to learn something that's important to you, learn something that's important to them. And it's when you form those true connections that you can get to the real learning and the content that you want to teach. But it's also important to let them in, you know, to who you are. And some of the best teachers I know have weirdly been theater majors. I have to say that I think that is a common thing. And I think a lot of that has to come from improv skills and the community that you form when you're in a show or you're with a community of artists, because it is very different. And I think I've worked with some amazing teaching artists who just wow me with their ability to walk into a room and just like deliver magic. And I think that that is something that definitely takes practice and a level of comfortability, and also just being human and who you are and making mistakes and really engaging in an honest way. I think connection is everything in a classroom, and creating just a really safe and brave space for kids to feel comfortable, because nobody learns when they're uncomfortable, and nobody learns when they're scared. We all know that as educators. And this is also a really scary time. So it feels extra important right now.
I love what you said about care and connection, and I'm all about collaboration, making it a safe space, because my classrooms are all about sharing ideas and critiques. And sometimes critiques can be great, sometimes you don't want to hear the critique, but it's an open, safe space. We're all here to help each other. We're not here to put everybody down, but like to understand that as an artist, you're going to go through this. This isn't the first time, and to make it a safe space for them. And the connection with your students. I love that you said, let them learn about you. I mean, I try and bring in all of the stories that I have about, being where they were. Like, I was in your seat. Like, believe me, I was where you were. Don't think that I wasn't. You know, I just think that I don't ever want to put assignments and students like so in a box. I want it to be open for ideas and collaboration. I mean, I teach filmmaking, so a lot of it is group work, crew work. Sometimes now, recently, it's been individual or small partners, but still like working together, knowing how to get along with your partners, knowing how to get along with your other classmates. And it's a give and take, and knowing that it's not going to stop in higher ed. You're going to have to do this for your job if you're going to want to be part of this, whole career. This is just the jumping off point. And I try and, share that in my classroom.
Something to add, since I was your student, I can add to that too. When we had our films, it was the final project. I wasn't done with mine yet, so I didn't share it because I literally edited to the last second because I wanted to, and I'm very happy with the project that it turned out to be. But I remember seeing everyone else's projects and kind of giving group feedback, but having the choice not to. And I didn't, because I didn't have it available. But I know other people might not have because they weren't comfortable with it. And that wasn't a lack in the classroom. That was just a personal choice. And so I think giving a lot of options is really important. And we talk about that with social emotional learning, which I'm sure you all have heard a million things about. And most teachers have heard about it now, which is great, that it's becoming a common conversation. But that's part of social emotional learning, from what I've seen when talking to teachers, is that it's about those choices and kind of helping the child or the student tailor it to themselves, which is great. Lisa, I saw you wrote something down. Do you have something to add?
I'm actually taking notes on what everyone else is saying too.
That's great.
This is all great stuff.
Absolutely.
Well, it is good to. I do see a lot of common threads with all of us. So I know. I mean, we're all in this together and seeing the same, observing some of the same things as well. So I find it interesting. So.
Absolutely. And so I kind of want to talk about social emotional learning. What are some things that, because it got really introduced after COVID kind of started to happen and kind of started to speed up and then slow down again. And so what are some of your perspectives on it?
Well, being I was on the committee with Bob Morrison and developing, but I think, I mean, it's the social emotional learning. There's a lot of different facets to it, coming from a lot of different, between a personal home life and how they feel in school, and experiences, and on top of everything else with COVID, and then like I said, coming to school wearing a mask or whatnot. I think there's a lot going on. I mean, it's a lot for young adults to take on, even for youngsters to take on. So I think it's just there needs to be some time for them to understand even their own thoughts, and not just to, because it's a different time than in, when I left students in March of 2019. It's different from when I see them today. Even today, what students pointed out to me today, because it's very I love when they tell me what's going on in their head, because it kind of gives me a little window of what's going on. They said, Mrs. Conklin, do you realize that nobody in this school but current seniors have taken final exams? So people don't know, like, not that they don't know how to take a final exam, but they haven't taken final exams. And it's I'm like, well, yeah, I guess you're right. He goes, because when we were freshmen, for our freshman year, so March of 2020 was when COVID hit, and then we were out, so we didn't have finals then. And then the following year, we didn't have finals then, and now it's coming up to, yes, so that was their sophomore year. Now this is their junior, so now senior year. Yeah. So I said, oh my gosh, I'm like, to think about that, I'm like, wow. And maybe I should give that even more thought when I put together and reconfigure my final exam. I mean, some people haven't taken however long, an hour and a half spot of an exam or whatnot, and some of them are actually surprised. They're like, art has a final exam? I'm like, yep, the school requires it. So I find it interesting that they can, the more that I like what we were just saying, the more that they're comfortable and then can express like what they're thinking, what they're feeling. If a lot of them are reserved and don't want to talk, then can they draw about? I think that helps, some sort of therapy in that.
I think what you said, Lisa, about, if they don't feel comfortable talking, can they draw, or just giving the choices. I think, now that we've been diving into social emotional learning for quite a bit, my thought, I have a lot of thoughts on it, but I'm gonna stick to two. Which the first is, I think modeling is everything when it comes to social emotional learning. I personally don't love the approach, like, we teach social emotional learning every morning from 8:30 to 9, and it's like, nope. To my opinion, you model it all day long. You're asking questions, and you're coming from a place of inquiry, and you're listening, and you're helping to reflect, and you're helping kids reflect with one another. Because that dedicated half an hour or whatever it is, then what? Then they have to put it into context later in the day. Like, it should be naturally happening. And then the other thing is equity, and what are our expectations around social emotional learning? I have a neurodivergent kiddo, and what participation looks like for them may be very different than what participation or engagement looks like for another child. And so when it comes to social emotional learning, I don't feel it's not this cookie cutter curriculum, or there's a framework, of course, and some great essential questions. And I love the SEL New Jersey website. It's wonderful. But I also think it's important for teachers to, again, know your students, and what are we celebrating? What are we expecting? What homes do these kids come from? What are their backgrounds? Did they skip a grade? Have they been left behind a grade? Like, there are just so many tiny components that make up who a tiny human being is, and they're a whole human. And so it's so important for us as educators to really have that lens of equity on, and just be checking in with ourselves and our expectations around social emotional learning. Those are my two thoughts on that.
This sort of makes me think a little bit about the culturally responsive work, because I think it is, tied to it very closely. It's certainly a pillar of it, and makes me think of one of the early pieces that we talk about in the culturally responsive arts education workout is this. It's a children's book called La Maleta. By Liz Davina Lozano, and it's a story about a young girl who has a suitcase, and it's filled with all her cultures and all her all all the love of her nana and her parents, etc. And then when she goes to school, when she enters that door for the first time, and the suitcase has stickers of love, just chronicles her 5-year-old life. And she has to give up her suitcase when she enters the door. And she's given a new suitcase. And in that suitcase is a whole bunch of other things that are part of our system and part of becoming part of assimilating into public education. And she ends up getting, going away to college and noticing that people get to keep, they had both their suitcases. And, so she goes back to school and she finds the custodian and she says, do you know where my suitcase is? And she goes and she finds this closet and it's filled with all these colorful suitcases of all the kids who've had to really give up sort of their identity. They got other ones. Some of them got to keep pieces. And it's a really powerful story, I think, to sort of have a conversation around assimilation, about culture, about identity, and all those things that make us who we are. And we did an art exercise, and Lori Barstow, who's an art educator in Trenton, she actually did a project with her students where, and she's an elementary school teacher, where she helped them. She had a whole bunch of computer boxes because of COVID. Everyone got new equipment, so she had collected them all, as all good art teachers do. They collect everything. She had a whole bunch, and she made suitcases with them, and they got to put on little pieces of things about their identity and their culture, and just sort of treasure it. And it's a little box where they can continue to put things that make them who they are. And it's just sort of a small story, but I think it's a powerful one. We've had this conversation with adults, and we had really powerful conversations with adults around it. For many people in the story were, who were educators, they thought, am I that teacher? I don't want to be that teacher who does it. Some people were the little girls. Some people were the kids that sort of treat her poorly in it. And others were even saying, you know what? Sometimes the suitcase my family gives me is not the right suitcase for me, And so we had all kinds of conversations about, very much, I think, sort of what you're talking about, Christina, about really helping kids to use their art form to figure out who they are and be themselves in that classroom. And I do think that's just tied to social emotional learning.
That brings baggage. It makes it non-derogatory. It's great. It reminds me of a line from, it reminded me of a lot of wonderful things. It's great, but it reminded me of a line from Rent where it's, you don't want baggage without lifetime guarantee. And I thought a lot about that when I was younger, because everyone has baggage. Everyone has these things about themselves, which are good, which are bad. I'm a good writer, but I'm not that great dancer, and so, that's a small example, but there's things which you have to accept about your partner, or about your best friend, or about anyone you meet ever. And so everyone has this baggage, and it just is part of you. And I think that's a really good example.
And Brené Brown, she writes a lot about shame, and, she talks about, some huge percentage of people who their first experience of shame is in school. And then she said, and then a large percentage of those people were in the art classroom. And, I was kind of shocked, but when you talk to people, especially when you're doing like arts integration with non-arts people, first thing that comes out of their mouth is, oh, I can't draw, I can't dance. There's just this negative feeling that they can't, and you wonder where that comes from. But I think that we have to think about that in the classroom, because there are ways that we were taught how to teach, right, that show up in our own teaching. And, like Lisa, I appreciate that you say you're very aware of that and you do the opposite.
It's so funny because Wendy, I'm so taken aback by that too. Like the idea that shame would have happened in an art class. Because as a kid, my shame came in regular classroom where like I will admit as being human, Lisa, when you were like organized and color coded, like I was the kid who got my desk dumped out in front of the whole class because it was disorganized, and like. But like when I went to art class, I could just glue things down and throw things around and like it didn't matter. And I was able to just, like I said before, exist. And so I'm really taken aback by the idea. But then I can see it when I think about expectations traditionally in art, and I'm just processing this as we talk, because that's the first time I heard that, and it's so interesting.
Well, mine was in gym class, so
that brought me some shame too, with that rope climbing thing. The presidential fitness test, that brought me a lot of shame. It's fair.
I don't know where my first shame was. Probably, I don't know. To reveal it, I probably think it would be a little bit much. I don't know. I think it'd probably be an interpersonal thing with my family. But thinking about it in school, part of the reason that I am on the track I am now is because I didn't fit in the arts where I was. I did theater and I just didn't fit in with anybody. I just didn't. I didn't go to the events. I went to the events and I'd like worked at the events, but I didn't go to the events that like the kids hosted and that sort of stuff. I just didn't fit in there. But then my sophomore year, I was like, yeah, I'll try some other stuff. And my dad was like, here's this little scrap of paper and it has the information. You can go to a film camp. And I was like, cool, I'll check out a film camp. And I kind of came in and was very willing to learn because I was like, I only know how to write scripts because I had written scripts my whole life. And they were like, cool, let's do it. And then I ended up writing the script for the project and coming up with the story for the project. And then it kind of snowballed from there. And then I did props. And that's how I contributed to the group and it was a very valuable part for me. It was a very valuable part of the group that was a skill that I didn't know that I necessarily completely had. And so I think something my mom taught me when I was younger, she said when I was younger, was knowing to know what you are, you have to know sometimes what you're not. And so I think like we said earlier when we were discussing kind of having every discipline and what disciplines flowed with us, because we also talked about this in the Student Voices Roundtable, which is up on YouTube if anybody wants to check it out. It was very, very interesting, and there'll be clips circulating on social media soon. But we talked about flow, and we talked about about students and which pieces of arts expression they didn't flow with, but which ones changed their whole lives. And that's really, I think it's a really interesting way of looking at it, is kind of accepting the parts which aren't you to know what parts are you. So does anyone have anything else to say about this section? Because we have a comment which we can address, but I just don't want to leave anything hanging. Okay, so someone from our organization logged on and asked Wendy if you would be able to share any information about the Culturally Responsive Arts Educators Workout. I'm very curious myself, and I think it would, from the name, I think it'll balance well with what we were just discussing.
Well, it was sponsored by the Arts Ed New Jersey, and it launched at the beginning of January, and it just finished. It was an 8-week opportunity to 3 days a week read or watch content about culture, about identity, about issues around race and bias, grading, all kinds of things that helped educators and teaching artists and arts administrators think about how culture shows up in the classroom. And what I appreciated about it is that you read, and then there are a series of prompts. So for those folks who reflect and feel, you could write about it. We had a Google Classroom, And every other week we had, and there's movies, we had a list of movies to watch on the weekend with your family. Some you shouldn't watch with your family. And then every other week we had a conversation in the evening or late afternoon with a group of people who raised their hand to say they wanted to be a part of it and to sort of talk about it, what they were learning. And I think another key piece to it is that we adapted the NYU Steinhardt has a culturally responsive scorecard that they use to look at curriculum. They created it for math and ELA, and we adapted it for the arts. And it's a really helpful tool. We thought it was really important, and Arts in New Jersey really felt that it was an important time to be looking at culturally responsive practice as we're rewriting curriculum, because in many ways, it's a once in a lifetime opportunity, or once in a decade, hopefully not lifetime, for us to really look at what we're teaching, not only who gets represented, but how we teach. And so part of the scorecard is about diversity and representation. A piece of it is also about social justice. And another piece is about the teacher materials. And so we're in conversation, hoping, to figure out what's next. It was a lot of content. We may do it, hopefully we'll do it again in either this summer or in the fall. We have to find the right time because no secret, teachers are pretty overwhelmed. And even as much as they were doing it, it was another thing that they needed to do. So we want to make sure that it's digestible enough. And the key is too, we're such a culture of perfectionism. Another thing I think we learned from school is how to do it right. And, and it was so interesting because a lot of people got started and they didn't finish and they felt like they had failed in some way. And I just want to say to anybody who was part of it, and if you dropped off at week 2, it's all still sitting there. You can pick it up at any time, and don't let perfect get in the way of progress when it comes to this kind of work.
I have to say I was a quiet participator, but I loved it. I always read the emails. I picked up some of the resources. I wrote down the reflection questions. I'm a big fan of reflection questions. I even worked some of the reflection questions into my lesson plans for students. I thought the content was amazing, and I really appreciated it. So
thank you. Well, we hope to do it again and have it be driven, educate. I mean, it needs to be led by educators. Latasha Castrolo-Lala also participated with us and led the conversations around curriculum. And we had a really great team of people surround it. So we hope to do it again.
So is there any way for the people who didn't sign up originally to access this content currently, like the ones that just happened?
Well, I think that they should send their name to Kira, probably, and then we can sort of talk about how we can do that.
And so that would be Kira at artsednj.org. So I'll put that up right now.
Thank you.
And it's great being part of this organization for multitudinous reasons, but kind of a boring one is that our emails are very easy. And so there you go. If you're interested in the Cray workshop, definitely check it out. And with that, I think we're going to start closing down because this hour flew by with such lovely people. Do we have any comments or questions for the group before we move on? We have a little bit of time left. Okay. And I hope to see you all again soon. We'll keep you posted on any events that are coming up. And I'll do some spiel before we leave about what's happening with Arts at NJ. So this is kind of closing down our Arts in Our Schools month, though arts should be in our schools year round, of course. But we're kind of closing down the celebratory month. But we're not quite done yet because tomorrow we will be hosting the Festival Fun Facts last installment. And so we'll be talking about the submission process. So even those, because I talked to a lot of people at the tables this month about the New Jersey Solo and Ensemble Festival. So even those who weren't able to register in time, they can still tune in to all of these streams and kind of get an understanding of what it is, because I'm sure it'll be back next year because it's such a big hit and it's just such a great program. And then also look out next month. It's International Jazz Month, and so we'll be highlighting a very interesting couple, and we'll be doing some things for that specific art. And that's everything we have going on. I hope everyone has that's everything we have going on content wise. I'm sure we have much more going on in our lives. I hope everyone has a wonderful night. Thank you all for being part of this. This was wonderful.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And I hope everyone gets home safe. And if you're already home, I hope you have a very restful evening. And see you next week.
Thanks all.
Thanks, everyone.
Next week. Bye.